The history of U.S. presidential complicity in Israel's war crimes. Harry Truman, 1945 to 1953, the beginning of an alliance. The partnership between the United States and Israel began with President Harry Truman's recognition of Israel in May, 1948, just minutes after its declaration of independence. While the world saw jubilant celebrations in Tel Aviv, Palestinian families fled for their lives in what became known as the Nakba. Over 700,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes, villages were wiped from the map. Massacres, such as the one in Deir Yassin where over 100 men, women, and children were killed, sent waves of terror across the land. Truman's administration was fully aware of these atrocities through U.S. diplomatic cables, yet he saw Israel as a critical Cold War ally in the Middle East. His choice set a precedent: U.S. support, regardless of human rights violations. Dwight Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961, and John F. Kennedy, 1961 to 1963, arms began to flow. Eisenhower briefly stood against Israeli expansionism during the Suez Crisis in 1956, forcing Israel to withdraw from Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. But this was more about preserving U.S. influence in the region than protecting Palestinian lives. John F. Kennedy deepened military cooperation. His administration approved the first significant arms sales to Israel, paving the way for Israel's technological superiority in the region. Kennedy's warnings about Israel's nuclear ambitions were ignored in favor of strategic alignment. Lyndon B. Johnson, 1963 to 1969, the occupation begins. Under Johnson, U.S.-Israeli ties became even stronger. During the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel captured Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The occupation saw mass arrests, collective punishments, and home demolitions that uprooted thousands of Palestinians. Johnson's administration responded not with condemnation but with military aid and UN vetoes shielding Israel from accountability. This was the beginning of what Palestinians describe as decades of military rule and systemic oppression. Richard Nixon, 1969 to 1974, escalation and immunity. Nixon's administration provided Israel with vast quantities of weapons during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israeli airstrikes killed thousands in Egypt and Syria, with documented civilian casualties. Nixon's support solidified a pattern where even large-scale military operations went unchallenged by Washington. The vetoes at the UN continued, ensuring Israel faced no significant international consequences. Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989, Lebanon and Sabra and Shatila. During Reagan's presidency, Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. The assault on Beirut led to weeks of bombardment and a humanitarian crisis. The most infamous atrocity occurred when Israeli forces surrounded the Palestinian refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila. Over 3 days, Allied Lebanese militias massacred hundreds, perhaps thousands, of civilians while Israeli soldiers maintained perimeter control and lit the night sky with flares. International investigations later determined that Israel bore responsibility for allowing and facilitating the killings. Despite this, Reagan expanded arms sales to Israel and continued shielding it diplomatically. George H.W. Bush, 1989 to 1993, Intifada and settlements. The first Intifada erupted during Bush's presidency as Palestinians protested decades of occupation. Israeli forces responded with live ammunition, beatings, and mass arrests. While Bush publicly criticized Israel's aggressive settlement expansion, he approved continued military aid and used veto power at the UN to block critical resolutions. The systemic human rights abuses against Palestinians escalated, with collective punishments such as house demolitions becoming routine. Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, Oslo and Netanyahu's first term. The Oslo Accords promised a path to peace but failed to deliver justice. During this time, Benjamin Netanyahu rose to power in 1996. His first term as prime minister marked a period of heightened aggression. Netanyahu's government accelerated settlement construction deep in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, demolished Palestinian homes, and approved targeted assassinations of Palestinian leaders, often in densely populated areas, causing civilian casualties. Clinton's administration maintained military aid and diplomatic protection for Israel, despite frustration with Netanyahu's efforts to undermine the peace process. This set the tone for a relationship in which Israel's increasingly hardline policies were insulated from international consequences. George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, the Second Intifada and Gaza Siege. The Second Intifada began in 2000, with Israeli forces using tanks, helicopters, and F-16s to suppress Palestinian uprisings. Netanyahu, though not prime minister, supported the harsh tactics and called for even more aggressive military responses. In 2008 and 2009, Netanyahu returned to power just as Israel launched Operation Cast Lead. Over 1,400 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, including hundreds of women and children. Human rights organizations documented the use of white phosphorus in civilian areas and the destruction of homes, schools, and hospitals. Bush's administration supplied the weapons and provided full political backing, framing Israel's actions as part of the war on terror. Barack Obama 2009 to 2017, blockade and protective edge. Netanyahu's second term as prime minister coincided with Barack Obama's presidency. Under Netanyahu, Israel enforced a brutal blockade on Gaza, described by the United Nations as collective punishment of 2 million people. In 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, Israeli airstrikes and shelling killed over 2,000 Palestinians, including more than 500 children. UN investigations documented repeated attacks on civilian infrastructure, including UN schools and shelters. Obama's administration responded with the largest military aid package in U.S. history and blocked attempts at international accountability, ensuring that Israel faced no real consequences for its actions. Donald Trump, 2017 to 2025, unprecedented support and regional war. Trump's presidency marked a period of unprecedented U.S. support for Israel. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and cut aid to Palestinians. During Gaza's Great March of Return protests, Israeli snipers killed over 200 unarmed demonstrators and injured thousands, including medics and journalists. The Trump administration remained silent and increased arms shipments to Israel. In July 2025, Netanyahu ordered strikes against Iran during a 12-day conflict following militia attacks on Israeli targets. The climax came with Israel's bombing of Iran's Fordow nuclear enrichment facility, using U.S. intelligence and logistical support. The strikes killed dozens of Iranian civilians and sparked international outrage. Trump defended the actions as necessary for regional stability. This escalation followed the October 7 Palestinian attacks, where militants launched coordinated rocket barrages and cross-border infiltrations into Israel. Israel's response was swift and devastating. Airstrikes leveled entire neighborhoods in Gaza, killing thousands of civilians. The blockade tightened further, cutting off food, water, electricity, and medical supplies. Humanitarian organizations now describe the situation as genocidal. The United States continued to provide weapons and blocked UN efforts for a ceasefire or war crimes investigations. For over 70 years, American presidents have enabled Israel's military campaigns and occupation through unflinching support. Benjamin Netanyahu's tenure has seen some of the most destructive offensives in Israel's history. Together, their actions have created a system where international law is sidelined, accountability is absent, and generations of Palestinians live under siege. Without meaningful change, this alliance will continue to fuel a cycle of violence with no end in sight.